we've got a special guest today. It's one of my close friends, a new author who has just released her first book, Lizzy Ives, joining us. And Lizzy lives in Southern California, and was kind enough to join us today. So we're gonna find out about her book, Fat Witch Summer, and we're also going to find out a lot about her journey towards producing the book, and she actually published the book herself. So we're going to find out about what that process was like, and also about her writing process. So get ready, because it's going to be a really fun episode with a lot of twists and turns potentially. So anyways, let's have Lizzy talk about herself. So Lizzy, please do tell us about yourself, and a little to give the listeners a little insight into you as an author.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me on the podcast, Amir. Amir and I went to high school together, so I'm originally from the Bay Area, but I've lived in Los Angeles for the past 10-ish years. I went to film school down at Chapman University, which is in Orange County. I studied directing, and then I found that I kept taking all of these screenwriting classes. And when I was in high school, I really loved English as well. So it just kind of like one thing led to another, and I started writing in a lot of my free time. And that's a little bit about how I got to where I am now, which is I debuted, as they say, in the publishing world this year, which means my first book came out. And yeah, it's just been a whirlwind, as you hinted at.
That's awesome. Yeah. So what led you to this path? I know you've always been a great writer since I've known you. And I know you've always talked about how you were interested in writing a book potentially, and also getting involved both as an author and hopefully getting a book published. So I'm hoping you might be able to tell us a little about some of your influences, like what writers you look up to, how they've influenced your writing. So take it away.
Yeah. Well, honestly, I've been writing in some form or another ever since elementary school. Like, as soon as I had paper, I was stapling it together and writing books. Like my very first book, if you will, was like Sailor Moon fan fiction, basically, where every
Good
I
old
know, right? It's
fan
like, and
fiction.
every single one of my friends was like a different like gemstone, which is actually amazing when you think about Steven Universe would actually kind of like do that eventually, of like having kind of like magical girl tropes with
Right.
gemstones. But I did it first. That's what I'm here to clarify, actually.
Okay.
But yeah, so I've just been always super drawn to storytelling. I don't know what I find so compelling about it, but I think there's just something like so human about how it brings people together. If you're just like telling a silly gossipy story at a party, or if
Yeah.
you're sitting there reading a book and you're getting a glimpse at a different life, I just think that it has a great. There's basically just like this great power to like the empathy that storytelling like creates, basically. Um, but yeah, I've just always been drawn to like so many different art forms. Shortly after I graduated from film school, I worked in development at Skybound, which is kind of a comic book company, I guess you could say. It's Robert Kirkman of The Walking Dead. That's his imprint at Image Comics. So I worked there as an assistant to so many different departments. So like really, I've like dipped my toes in like so many different, you know, creative fields basically. But I think that the thing that has always resonated with each one is the writing. Like it's always like if the story isn't good, if like that, basic
Yeah.
essential element isn't there, it doesn't matter how good like the cinematography is, or the art for the comic book is, if the story like doesn't deliver.
Yeah, yes, absolutely. I agree with that wholeheartedly, that the writing is a key aspect, and especially the character development for me is a very pointed aspect that I look at when it comes to novels, and especially books that revolve around like world building.
Yeah.
That's a key for me as well. So on that note, so I know you've created sort of an ecosystem for this book, right? Like with the states, using the states as kind of like the world per se, for this particular um, uh, what's the word they use in writing, like the
Like the
sort
world
of
building.
the map, sort of like the map. of how things are interconnected within that realm. So I'm hoping you can maybe touch upon a little bit in terms of how you went about building this ecosystem. Like, what did you draw upon when you were first coming up with the idea?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, also for those of you who don't know, I guess I should like kind of pitch what Fat Witch Summer is. It's a body positive YA fantasy novel. So like the initial root of this idea was a world where there are three types of magic, which is super limiting, and that's part of kind of what the fantasy world is critiquing a little bit. So in this world, there's only three paths, and they're
Mm.
glamour magic, which is like illusion magic, growth magic, which is very healing based, and then sight magic, which is divination. And my intention with that was that those three paths of magic kind of correlate to the three roles that women are encouraged to play. You
Mm.
know, kind of like you got the maiden, mother, crone going on with those three types of magic. So that was kind of like where the initial idea came from. Like I knew I wanted there to be a fat or plus size teenage main character, and that her mom was forcing this illusion magic on her because she's hoping that, this glamour magic will make her thinner and like fix her looks essentially. So anyway, that's just kind of like the foundation of the main conflict in the story. But in order to choose her own type of magic, she sets out on this road trip with a group
Mm-hmm.
of girls who all have different reasons for why they don't want the magic that their parents want for them. And so that's how we kind of end up on this road trip, like Amir was saying, across the 13 states of America, which is like a witchy-fied version of the United States.
Hey, let's go.
Yeah.
Yeah. So on that note, I am very interested because I know not only did you come up with this ecosystem slash the states yourself, but and obviously wrote the book yourself, but I know you had some publishing hurdles to overcome when it came to getting the book to be in production and be able to actually successfully publish it. So can you tell us a little about that journey and like how it started and sort of like how you handled some of the difficulties? Because I know there were quite a few difficulties to say the least.
Yeah. Yeah, so I wrote the book between 2019 and 2020. And when I finished it in 2020, I was convinced that I should go the traditional publishing route, which is, for those of you who aren't familiar, how that basically works is the author has a completely finished book, and then you send a query letter to agents, which basically pitches the book to them. And then the agents get back to you and say, like, yes, send me the whole book, or no, I'm not interested,
Mm.
or they say nothing. Realistically,
Oh,
which means
jeez.
I'm not interested and I don't have
Right.
time to even reply to you, which, working professionals, I get it. So you send this query letter. If an agent says, yes, I want to take on your book and represent it, that's not even like the end of the road. Like what happens next is they have to take on the task of pitching it to editors who work for publishing houses. And the editors basically have the buying power to buy the book's rights for 10 years for a publishing house.
Mm.
However, it's not as simple even as just like editor says, I fell in love with this book, I want to buy this book. They actually go in front of a panel of like 10 different people, and they have to make the case for the book they want to acquire. So
Oh,
it's
wow.
I know it's this huge uphill battle basically, where it's not just up to you to have the best book. It's also like an agent has to really believe in the book, an editor has to really want to believe in the book and want to pay for it, but then the editor has to get these other people, the money people essentially, on board with the book. So there's like a lot of hurdles to overcome if you even get an agent. But basically what I found, I started querying the book. I revised it kind of between 2020 and 2021.
Mm-hmm.
And then I sent out those query letters. I got a really good response in general. Like something around like 30% of the agents who I queried read the book and were excited for it, which is really high. Like it's generally considered good if it's above 15%. So 30% was like a lot of people were
Oh, wow.
interested.
Yeah. So that's actually quite high then.
Yeah, yeah. So I was like, wow, this is definitely going to happen. But I kept running into this issue where, like, for example, there was one agent who was like, I really love it. Like, tell me if you hear any other movement. Like, my boss is going to read it. So the head of the agency read it with this other agent. They both really liked it, and they were like, don't go talk to anyone else, which, whatever. But anyway, they were so into it, but then like out of nowhere, we're like, never mind, we pass on it because we don't think we can sell it because it seems like it's too niche and too difficult to market. And so that was like towards the end of 2020, early
Right.
2021. And I basically had that pattern happen to me like 3 or 4 times over the next 2 years, where I kept getting really close with an agent and then they would just pass because they were like, I don't know if I can market this. Including there was one agent who wanted me to basically revise the book and take out all of that world building we talked about, like all of
Mm,
that setting of having these 13 states that are like inventive and witchy and like, which to me seems wild because I'm like, so they would just go on a road trip across the normal United States, like how boring compared to
right.
making up all of this magical stuff along the way. But
Yeah.
like that's kind of the thing, is that they are so concerned about marketing it, and to them it's like, oh, this looks like a lighthearted
Yeah.
contemporary book where we don't get into these deeper magical systems. So anyway, that was part of the problem I was running into, was that
Got
people
it.
wanted to strip all the world building out of the book basically.
Yeah, I mean, I can imagine that must have been very frustrating, when you put in all that work and then you're like, oh, wow, well, I can't just, I can't let go of this aspect. So, like, at that juncture, how did you weigh the possibilities, like realize, like, because at some point I'm guessing you had to have realized that, okay, it's either I pursue publishing this myself and, learn the ins and outs of what that's going to entail, or I need to just bite the bullet and accept the fact that I'm gonna have to go with some of the suggestions they're doing, even if I don't like it. Like, how did you weigh
Yeah.
that sort of like? And I'm asking this to be specific, just because I know I'm sure there are others that are in similar situations that probably would wonder the same thing.
Yeah, I mean it's really hard to know when to call it. When it came to that agent who said like take everything that you love out of the book, I knew that I couldn't listen to that with like a good conscience. And that's a piece of advice that they give you in publishing in general, is that
Mm,
if you get those rewrite offers from agents, like take it if you believe in it, but like don't waste another half a year revising something if you don't actually believe in the notes, essentially. But I think for me, like the turning point, because to me I could see how it was marketable, like the title is Fat Witch Summer, like it's, you can tell it's fun, it's lighthearted,
right.
it has that inherent body positivity in the title, it has witch in the title, so it's fantasy. Like to me, I felt like if I had to market it, I understand the way to market it, I don't know what their problem is. So to me, I was like, well, that makes it more tempting to self-publish it. But also,
Yeah.
I actually had a conversation with Keenan, our friend, at New Year's Eve in like 2022, where Keenan was like, well, at some point you have to give it like 6 more months and then like do it yourself probably. And I was like, no way. Like I'm
Oh,
sure this will get.
good old Keenan Fry, my co-host over here, putting in his own spin on things.
Yeah, but I mean, it was a good point, because at that point, I was kind of like traditional publishing or go home, and I hadn't really considered self-publishing it, because I think that I incorrectly thought that putting it out there would feel kind of like a failure, like admitting, oh, none of these publishers believed in it.
Right.
So like it was just like, I resisted that inherently. Like it's like an ego problem on my part, and I think a lot of artists deal with that, where
Yeah.
you're like, no, I'm brilliant and the book is perfect and
Why can't
everyone's
others
gonna
see it?
realize
Yeah,
at
yeah,
some
right.
point.
Why can't others see that, that it's as brilliant as I think, right? And like, and that's not always
Yeah.
and that's not always a you thing. That's also just maybe, like you said, they don't know, since they don't know the ins and outs of the audience you're trying to reach. They don't realize what mechanisms they can use to try to market it to that particular audience.
Yeah, and I mean, this is a whole other topic, but I've, really befriended a lot of authors who are traditionally published in the past couple months. The community in Los Angeles has been like super welcoming to me despite being
Mm-hmm.
self-published. And like, they run into the same problem where even though they got a traditional publishing deal, they feel like the publisher doesn't know how to market their book and doesn't want to spend any money marketing it. And so, I mean, there's so much I've learned through self-publishing, but one of the great advantages to it has honestly been that like no one can tell me like they're not going to support the book, because ultimately like I get to support the book. Like I, get to put in as much money as I want to marketing, and then decide if I'm making that back or not, which again is a whole other skill set, and it's definitely really complex.
Mm-hmm.
But it's definitely been more empowering than I expected. Like when I made that choice to launch a Kickstarter for the book, it was definitely a little scary, but I think ultimately like a super empowering way to go about it.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, I saw the Kickstarter. Unfortunately, I jumped on too late, so I was one of the stragglers that wasn't able to quite make it on. I'll admit, but but I'm definitely gonna purchase the book itself because like as I said, I really like the way you've gone about it. So, and I recommend to others also to at least take a chance and and potentially purchase the book and find out more from Lizzy herself if you want to. And like as she's pointed out, this is a very a book that's meant to be empowering for women, meant to be in general. It's an empowering book, and it's it's a really neat concept, I think. So yeah, on that note, everybody, we're gonna take a short break, our first intermission for this episode. Thanks again, Lizzy, for shaping a lot of the the context around what the difficulties are when it comes to publishing, and also just providing a very brief intro to the book itself. Okay, we are back now with the episode. We're still here with Lizzy, and so this segment, everybody, is going to be now more surrounding the writing process that Lizzy incorporates into her writing when it comes to not only this book but just in general, sort of getting an idea, a glimpse into how she cultivates her creative process and actually, translates that into the medium that she's producing. And then sort of the other part of it will be sort of, again, glimpsing a little more into the ecosystem to the extent that she can speak on it, obviously, because there's certain things that we don't want to spoil regarding the book and any potential, following up from the book itself, like in case there's a sequel or anything. So hint hint. So okay, all right, Lizzy. So let's start with the writing process, because I find that to be really interesting, because I used to also be very interested in writing, more so with poetry than anything else, but I always really wanted to sort of get a glimpse and inquire regarding the writing process and how different authors and different folks that write different medium like poetry and haikus and what's another one I could think of very easily off the top of my head, folks that draw, like for example when Josh was here, I asked him about his process. So similarly, I sort of just, maybe you can touch upon it, like what, when you're coming up with with ideas, like where do some of these ideas start, and like when you want to start writing it, like how do you get past the initial writer's block, because I'm sure that comes up at times. So yeah, feel free to take it away, and I will jump in at certain segments. Thanks.
Yeah, totally. Well, I mean, I don't know how to get over writer's block. I think that something that's really common that you hear from a lot of writers is that some days it's like it's really easy and you feel like the muse is with you, for lack of a better term, and then other days it's like you just can't write anything and you get super distracted. For me, it definitely is a matter of trying to remain focused, which is so hard now that we have phones interrupting us all the
Yeah.
time. Anyone who has children is probably being interrupted by kids all the time. Like, it's just very hard to find the time where you can actually like it can actually be you and your thoughts. And I think that's honestly the thing that I chase the most, is trying to find and carve out that time where I'm just like completely alone and able to
Hmm.
think through what I'm trying to say. Because I think sometimes, like, I've heard it almost like described as like meditation, where if you want to know what you truly think, you need to be comfortable being alone with your thoughts. And I think writing is a lot like that, where what you're trying to say and what you care about really clarifies if you can get rid of the noise. So for me, that leads to writing in the mornings a lot of the time because
Mm.
things haven't had a chance to intrude and distract you. Like when it's the first thing in the morning, and I'm not. Oops, sorry, I hit that thing.
Keep going. You were talking about writing in the morning. That's key because of the fact that it's quiet and nothing has really disturbed you yet.
I
Okay.
really like writing in the morning for that reason that you don't really have the noise yet intruding. Even though I'm not a morning person, ironically, I think it's still, you don't have distractions yet.
Hmm.
It's not a quote unquote bad day yet. You're not tired yet necessarily. So for me, that's one way that you can kind of try to chase that that focus, and that
Yeah.
stillness that you need to really like understand what you're trying to convey.
So on that note, when when you're starting to write, right, and you have a really good idea, like it's gonna go somewhere, like how do you start then to connect those different parts, like what's sort of the way that like do you start from the beginning, do you start from the end, do you start from the middle of like the journey you're thinking of of the characters taking? Like I'm just curious because I know I've heard other writers talk about how sometimes they start at the end because they know how they want it to end, but they don't necessarily know where they want it to begin. So like maybe yeah, if you can just give us a little insight into that to the extent that you can, obviously.
Yeah, totally. I definitely am someone who mostly goes chronologically, honestly, but I do outline kind of a general sense of where the story is going. I just don't really like say, oh, I'm going to write this random scene from the middle of the book, at the
Yeah,
beginning of the process. To
right.
me, I would get disoriented and it probably would like not make sense by the time I got to it. But yeah, I really like in the writing community, there's this kind of like fun terminology that I mostly blame Twitter for, which is plotting versus pantsing. And it's basically, plotting is like, okay, yeah,
What?
before you started writing, you really like plotted out all the story beats. And pantsing is flying by the seat of your pants and not having anything prepared in advance.
Okay,
Uh,
okay, I can
yeah,
kind of see it now. Okay, at
yeah,
first I'll admit I was very confused. I'm like, where are we going with this? Like, is this gonna
yeah.
become some
Like
like,
pants?
yeah,
Are we
is this?
pulling down the
I know.
pants of
Is this gonna be?
authors?
I was like, is this gonna become some like weird metaphor for like for people that are just like totally disorganized and like just all over the place and like just have nothing together in their lives? But now it made sense to me. Okay, cool. Glad
Yeah, and
that's
so I'm kind of like a plantser, honestly. I definitely like to have the main story beats, but like to me, I can't have like every single scene outlined, or else I get sort of like bored when I'm actually doing the writing. Like to me, there still has to be like some sense of discovery when you're like working on
yeah.
like drafting the actual chapters, or else I'm just like I wouldn't be like that invested. Like if all the discovery is just in the outlining phase, but it's hard because then like as I start outlining, I also want to just like dive in there. Like I'm trying to work on the
You have to
outline
reel
for a
yourself
sequel right
back.
now. What was
I
that?
say you have to reel yourself back.
Yeah, I mean, right now, like I was just saying that I'm like working on an outline for a potential sequel to Fat Witch Summer, but it's hard. Like I would rather like start writing it, Like when you start
Mm.
outlining it, you're like, oh, but what if I started working on the first chapter? And I'm trying really hard to like have a better outline in place because I think it does make writing faster. That's the main advantage of being a plotter instead of a pantser is that you don't accidentally end up with like extraneous characters you don't need. But
Mm.
that's also kind of like the fun of writing is those like weird characters that sneak in and stuff.
Right, and like sometimes those characters can actually get a nice little cameo too. Like maybe they become more important down the line than people realize.
Yeah, definitely.
Like
That's actually
that's
something that happened in Fat Witch Summer, where, for those of you who have read the book, and this is not really a spoiler, there are interlude chapters that are narrated by a talking horse. But
mm,
like, I knew from the beginning that I needed these little interludes to show that the main character's mom is like pursuing her on the road trip. Like, they're basically being chased. But
yeah.
I also knew that, like, for teenagers, like, they really like having her mom be a narrator didn't make any sense because if you're a teenager, like you can't get into the head of like your parents that's
No.
impossible when you're a teenager. So I was like, the mom can't be a narrator in this YA book. Like that just doesn't work.
Right.
And so I kind of had this idea at first of like, oh, there will be different like animals throughout, like little familiars for the witches that maybe narrate the interludes. But then like when I wrote the second chapter, I had to like create a character for the mom to have as a familiar, and I just like fell in love with this like very sassy ancient talking horse that is her familiar. And I was like,
Hey.
well, if the familiar is going to be with her as she's doing the pursuit, like that's who should narrate the little interludes. And so that definitely came around from like a fun character that just
Right.
needed to stick around the whole book.
That's great. That's honestly really cool. Yeah. So now going to the ecosystem of like the 13 states. So what made you choose number one to put it as 13? I'm curious. Like what was the reasoning behind that? And then like how did you like come up with the geography and topography sort of aspect of the world building in this case?
Yeah. Well, I knew that I wanted it to be a contemporary fantasy world, and I knew that I wanted there to be like a road trip across like a version of America, but like it's
Mm-hmm.
witchy-fied. Because like it's not really a pet peeve, but I do feel like a lot of fantasy that is set contemporarily is like people have powers, but it's just like in our normal world. And I was like, what would like a fantasy version of the US look like? I don't feel like I've seen that before. And honestly, when I was thinking about doing traditional publishing, I was like, how do I make sure no one's like had this idea? So part of what I set out to
Yeah.
do was
Right.
just create like a really unique world that I knew no one had done. So that was part of the thinking of like witchifying the United States. So the premise of the idea is that the U.S. was founded by witches who were fleeing persecution. So like they're the ones who like arrived as colonizers, and like that's how we got to where we are today. The 13 was honestly like just because it's witchy.
Ah, there we go.
Yeah, I just like, and that's the thing is like I really there's like some weird influences. Like I really love like surrealism actually, and like the films of like Maya Deren, for example, or even like the clam phones in It Follows, like how there's just kind of like this
Mm.
dreaminess to that
Right.
movie that's never explained. I kind of wanted to conjure that feeling where like I don't need to tell you, for example, that the characters have witch hats that work as like purses do, basically. Like you like can flip your hat upside down and you can store things in it, and it has more space in that hat than should fit in that hat. But like I don't need to explain it because we all know kind of like what these witch hats look like on a subliminal level. And like
Right.
similarly the girls use orbs to communicate like cell phones. And like that was just something that really appealed to me, was kind of like we can make it be a fantasy setting where you don't get so bogged down and kind of like the how does the fantasy work if we
Right.
kind of like lean into just like the imagery is something familiar to all of us.
Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, that's honestly how I feel. There's an anime I watch right now, Doctor Stone, that's kind of similar in that way. That if you question every single aspect of it, you're gonna be like going in circles all the time. But like if you just let things sit for a little bit, like it's kind of neat because like they also play a lot into what we have in the real world because it
Yeah.
ultimately is the real world, just a little shaped differently in the future, stonified.
Yeah, and it's like, yeah, it leads like to interesting world building too, like being like, how do I like reverse engineer it to make this like witchy version, the 13 states, like how did we get here? So
Mm-hmm.
like you kind of like end up doing like interesting world building to like get there. Like something I've seen in reviews for the book is people are surprised that it touches on like colonialism, for example,
Yeah.
and like racism and politics. And it's like, even though it's a lighthearted book, it partially touches on those because I was like, if we're talking about a fantasy America, then you kind of have to talk about those things too. Like they're just, you can't really get to like a country that feels like today without having to like reconcile with the past 250 years that got us here, you know?
Yes, absolutely. So real quick, I want to go actually in a little different route. I just realized, and I didn't plan this, but I kind of feel like it's should be talked about a little bit. Is so I know you talked earlier about the body positivity theme within the book, and like how that's a
Mm-hmm.
big part of what shaped sort of the necessity of having this this the the story that you're telling in this in the context of the book. So I'm hoping maybe you could talk a little about like what like drove that message, like made you like realize that that's the message you want to promote through the book. Like, was there something in real life that like spurred it? Was there something just like that came to you as you were writing that you're like, oh, this is a great opportunity to do it? Like, I'm just really curious to know like what the inspiration was for it.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a couple different things converging. Like, I feel like sort of rebelling against beauty standards and being annoyed by them is something that is, I have just felt my entire life. So that was definitely part of the inspiration there. In addition to all of my female friends, generally feel like they have some sort of conflict where they have like a mother or mother figure like trying to police how they look and present themselves. So
Yeah.
those things definitely influence the story. But then I also, like I have been like fat or overweight, however you want to describe it, because I know that fat is like a word that we're trying to make neutral, but it still is, has such negative connotations.
Right.
But like I have been that like my entire life, right? And I had this realization too that like they're just all the characters who are fat and everything are just like they're just like silly supporting comedic relief. Like they're never the heroes of the stories. And it got even more upsetting when I realized how many authors are fat or plus size. And I
Mm.
was like, so they're all like so many of them are fat and then none of them write like all of their protagonists are thin. And I was like, this is crazy. How is this a thing?
Yeah, wow, that's interesting. I didn't even think to that extent about that. So like, so going off that premise now of like talking about that, there are authors that, like you said, are fat. They or maybe they're not fat, but they're not thin like per se, and they're writing thin characters like to be the protagonist. So like, how do you see it in terms of like weighing the messaging, and I want to be careful about this, obviously, the way I'm phrasing it, but like in terms of like, again, like I because I personally like really also embrace the message of body positivity, but I'm also careful with it just because of the fact that also like there is to a certain extent also like risk with some of the factors that go into it, right? Like in terms of if somebody is borderline obese versus just fat, let's say, and somebody's borderline obese, like there's health risks that go with that. So I'm wondering, like, in terms of you know the messaging, was there anything you had to consider regarding like the messaging, or did you just sort of leave that to the audience to sort of realize that, like, hey, this is like, this isn't a this again, it's like a positive message, but like don't take it for like, oh, you can just like go wild and like and not like not take into account health as well to a certain extent.
Yeah, I mean, I think that at the end of the day, like health, regardless of weight, because like it can be connected, sometimes it's not, like in terms of your issues. I think that that's really like a conversation that everyone, it's like a private conversation with your doctor, basically. There's also a lot of like, I mean, it's like there's so much depth to it,
Yeah,
but there's a lot of,
that's why I was wondering like how much
yeah,
you delved into it, or if you were just like, no, this is something that like I get that it's something that can be brought up, but it's not like it's gonna take away from the main message of the book. So
yeah. I mean, it's like I said, I think when it comes to like health and its connection to weight, that's like for medical professionals basically,
mm,
and like everyone is navigating that in their own way. And I felt
yes,
like it was kind of outside the scope of the book. I think one of the unfortunate things is that a lot of times like anti-fat bias, which is kind of like the new term that we're using for fat phobia, because to be respectful to phobias basically, but like having a bias against fat people often gets connected to this kind of like fake concern for people's health. So like it's just like a delicate issue, because you don't want to be policing people's bodies just
right.
because you have like some fake concern for their health. Like in general, what I've heard, especially from people who are like fatter than I am, because there are different levels and different amounts in which your life is impacted or not. is that in general, like they don't want to hear from anyone about like your concern for their health. Like that's a private thing. Like you don't actually know their health outcomes or struggles based on their weight. So like I really felt like
Yeah,
it wasn't the place of the book to touch on that.
and there can be genetic factors too, right? That's the thing that for me that gets
Yeah.
sometimes a little overlooked is that like people are like, oh well, this person's fat and like they should just go on a diet, and I'm like, well, that's not the end all be all, guys. Like there's sometimes genetic factors that make it a lot harder for it's not one v one, apples and apples all the time. So yeah, I definitely respect that position as well. I appreciate you bringing that up because I just thought, again, this is a good time to sort of talk about that as well, since since you're talking about the message of body positivity. And we actually, funny enough, have brought that up on the podcast before too, talking about it. And like we had differing viewpoints obviously across the board, and one of mine was just, again, to be very respectful and mindful of the fact that not everybody faces the same situation when it comes to why they're necessarily overweight or why they have certain risk factors that are impacting their lives.
Yeah, exactly. And I would say that if you personally like a listener feels like the need to tell fat people about their health and their body, like that's just like kind of an inappropriate conversation to have. Like you having opinion about other people's health in any realm is just not something you need to talk to them about. Like
Yeah.
it's just such a weird thing where I think we overstep when it comes to people's appearance, and we think that we like get to weigh in on that. But like it's the same thing where I'm not going to like go up to someone who has like some other health issue and tell them like you're doing it wrong. Like don't make any assumptions. It's not your realm to interfere.
Yeah, so I know we're a little over on this segment, but I really like the direction it's going, so I'm going to let it roll a little bit, which is that I'm curious then, so going off that note of, not people not really, approaching the health aspect of other people, because again, like I get it that it's a very like sensitive and private topic. What's your take on like the media's influence in it? Because I feel like that's what really sort of gives people that like I guess kind of like the intuition that they can just go ahead and ask and imply and and inquire regarding things. Because if the media does it, they're like, oh well, like the media is talking about this and this celebrity, and like they're constantly like talking about the fact that what was the one I saw recently, like Kim K's new workout routine or whatever that everybody was clowning on TikTok. So like those type of things, I feel like then like people like take that to another extent where they're like, oh well, if someone's TMZ can do it, then like why can't I like be talking about it? And I'm like, and my personal view is I'm like, whoa, hold your horses, guys. TMZ does this because that's how they make their money. Like they literally, that's what they get paid for.
There's a lot of money to be made in making people feel bad.
Like,
I mean, marketing is literally like convince someone they have a problem, and then if they buy your thing, they're gonna fix it.
yeah, right.
So like
Like if you're not making money off it, like there's, and even that like to me is kind of like like really slimy in a lot of ways. But especially if you're not making money off it, I'm like, well then like, what are you gaining from this? Is it just some like perverse pleasure of like putting somebody else down? Like,
yeah, I mean, probably. When it comes to TMZ, I think there is that, like, just kind of like gossiping, about celebrities. There's definitely something that's enjoyable about that. And like a bit of like maybe the Schadenfreude, of seeing other people struggle with something.
Yeah, there we go. What a word right there. Yes, there you go. That's your author coming out right there. The really charged word too that I wouldn't have even thought to describe it. Yeah, so on that note, we are gonna take our second break for this episode. Really great conversation. I'm personally really fascinated by the turns that that we took with this particular segment. Hope the listeners, you guys enjoyed it as well. And we will be back very shortly, in 5 minutes, possibly a little less, for the third segment. For the surprise segment, actually, being that today is Pride, and the Pride weekend in SF, I had a little trivia set up for you, like
Uh-oh.
regarding Pride, and no worries, multiple choice, so it's not going to be super hard. It's just basic questions, and it's okay if you get it wrong. Again, this is supposed to be educational and informative, not. I'm using this mainly for the listeners, so they don't try to like clown myself and you, like for necessarily not knowing these answers beforehand. So, anyways, it's gonna be really quick. It's like quick. It's about 8 questions. And I can't take credit for it. I didn't pre-prepare this, so I'm gonna give credit to CraftyLab.com for coming up with these questions, which I like. So, anyways, yeah, we'll just roll through these. Let me know what you think the answer is. And listeners, you can also participate, please. Like feel free to put what you think is the answer. And you can debate it if you want. Granted, I may not participate in the debate because, I have the answers. So,
Fair.
okay. All right, here we go. So, a little Pride history trivia starting in 20 seconds. Let's start at exactly the hour mark. Oh, speaking of speaking of Jeopardy, how about or is that, or am I getting it confused? I thought it was Jeopardy, right? That Pat's leaving, or am I mistaking that with Wheel of Fortune? Is that Wheel of Fortune?
Maybe that's Wheel of Fortune.
I think that's Wheel of Fortune, right? Pat Sajak, right?
I think so.
Yeah. Okay.
As a cord-cutting millennial, I'm not like the most familiar with the
same
shows.
Here. Okay. Anyways, let's get right into it. Here we go. Pride history trivia. Okay, Lizzy. So, question 1. How many colors did the original Pride flag have? And here are the particular options. So 1, 5, 2, 8, or 3, 6.
I feel like A5.
Is that your final answer?
Yes.
Okay. Unfortunately, that is not correct. It actually had 8 colors on it. And don't ask me what the colors were because it does not specify. So I'm not going to go into that. But I mean, I can kind of see the flag in front of me though. So it looks like it's purple, blue, green, yellow, orange, red, and it's like a different tint of green. I don't know what the other tint is, but it's probably honestly a different color, and I just don't know. Sorry.
That's okay. I definitely assumed the simpler version would be the original one. They only had 5.
Yeah, right. It sounds like no, that wasn't the case. So
got tricked.
This is one actually I got asked in trivia recently at a different event, so I actually knew the answer even going in. So here we go. Where does the word lesbian come from? So number 1.
Oh, I think I do know this. Is it the island of Lesbos in Greek mythology?
Ah, damn, you already got it. There you go. The poet Sappho and the island of Lesbos. Got it. Didn't even need me to finish the question. Dang. Okay, all right, let's just go to the next one then. It's clearly Miss Smarty Pants over here is going to rule over the trivia. Let's go. Okay. Who organized the first Pride event? So here are the options.
Oh, right. I forgot I get options. I was like, I'm ready to go.
Yeah. No, you get options. No worries. So, number 1, Sylvia Rivera. Number 2, Marsha P. Johnson. Or 3, Brenda Howard.
I think it's Marsha P. Johnson.
Is that your final answer?
Yeah.
Okay. Unfortunately, that's not correct. It's Brenda Howard who actually organized the first Pride event. But that's okay. Now you know. Going forward, so if somebody asks you, you will know the answer. Okay, this one you may know the answer to actually, because I knew this one too, just because of having lived in the U.S. So, what year did same-sex marriage become legal nationwide in the U.S.? So these are the options. Number 1, 2011. Number 2, 2015, or number 3, 2018.
That's a good question. It's so bad. I feel like I read an entire book on this, and then I was like, "Wait, how did I already forget?
Well,
how did that happen?"
I'll give you one clue. Okay, it's not 2011.
Yeah, I was trying to think because also I feel like there's the weirdness if it was briefly legal in 2008.
Yeah.
So then it's like okay, then no.
So you got 15 and 18, 50-50.
I guess I'll say 2015.
Yep, you got it.
Woo!
Yeah, there you go. There you go. That was it. Well, except obviously we know what's happening now with like all the stuff with Florida and everybody.
Yeah.
So, yeah, we'll see if that actually keeps up. But I hope. I'm gonna, hope that's the case.
Yeah.
Oh, I just realized I need to probably show myself a bit too here. I'm being, I'm being lame about this. Okay, all right. A couple more questions. We'll limit it to two more. So which state was the first to outlaw discrimination on the basis of sexual orientation? Here are the options. Number one, California. Number two, Wisconsin. Number three, Vermont.
I'm gonna say Vermont.
Oh, you were so close. It's Wisconsin. But at
Uh
least you didn't say California though. So kudos to you, because most people I know would say California. I'm positive they would go with
yeah.
California.
I
No,
didn't get tricked by that, but I am surprised. Good job, Wisconsin.
right? Good job, Wisconsin. Okay, here's the last question of the day, and I think it's a very appropriate one for Pride. When is National Coming Out Day? And here are the options. Number one, July 23rd. Number two, May 1st. Or number three, October 11th.
Hmm.
This is a tough one, honestly. I would have gotten this one wrong.
Yeah, this one is rough. Especially because now I feel like there are so many days. Like we have Trans Day of Visibility, for example, and like there's like a day for every identity on the flag, which is great. But I would say July, the July date.
Oh, so close. It's October
No, it's
11th.
October. Ah, I knew it wasn't the
You
other
you knew it
one.
wasn't May,
Ah,
yeah, but it's all good. It's all good. Again, this is more so just we become educated on it and really understand some of the history behind the Pride movement and what goes into it, because I think it's kind of lost sometimes in all the furor and like the parades and stuff, that like there's truly a quite actually rich now history behind it of why it's become
yeah.
such a big thing, especially in the city, in SF, like where people have a lot of, and no pun intended, pride. So, anyways, I wanna for this last bit, and we'll do about 3 minutes, since I know we're over time, and apologies, I know we're over time. So if you want to just give a few shout outs and just give some kudos to folks, that's sort of what this last segment is all about. And you can also use it obviously to to promote the book, and promote anything else you want to regarding the book. So feel free to take it away, Lizzy. Thanks.
Yeah, for sure. Well, thank you obviously to all the Kickstarter backers who helped make Fat Witch Summer a reality. Thank you to Ben, my husband, who helped with so much from the Kickstarter to the book launch event, which happened last
Woo,
weekend.
man.
Thank you to all my Bay Area friends, including Amir and Keenan, but also Drew and Haley, Justin and Laura, Tull Drew, we gotta hit all the Drews, and Patty. And yeah, if you want to
Yay.
buy the book, you can buy it from Amazon, you can buy it from Barnes and Noble. Any indie bookstore can order a copy. They just aren't necessarily going to have already stocked it, which you see with like any book that's not like
Mm.
a national bestseller. If you want to buy signed copies, you can buy them from the Sword and Rose Press shop, which is just at swordandrosepress.com. That is the little indie, publisher that I have created to distribute the book.
Let's
So we have
go.
signed copies and merch there. There's also a couple places in Los Angeles that carry signed copies, including Book Soup, Vroman's, The Ripped Bodice, and Village Well in Culver City. Also, if you want to help support the book other than buying it and throwing the dollars at it, leaving reviews is hugely helpful, especially on Amazon. That helps game the algorithm in this terrible age of algorithms.
Oof. Yeah. Yes. Yes, indeed. I definitely know that the algorithms is a big part of things, whether it be social media or trying to sell a book, or doing trying to make it big on whatever you're trying to do. Essentially, there's always an algorithm now. AI, especially, I'm sure, adds to it too, and a whole new layer of complexity.
Yeah,
So,
definitely.
um, yeah, again, really glad to have you on board, Lizzy. This has been a real pleasure for me, because especially as somebody that really respects the fact that you took the plunge and have really, done quite well in terms of getting, not only the book out, but really, really marketing it now too. So kudos to you, because I know it must be super hard. I can only imagine, because I pretty much gave up on my wanting to go the author route a long time ago, and I was like, I'm really happy at least one of us continued and like persevered and went that route. Yeah. So again, really, really fantastic to have you on the episode. I look forward to hopefully, not only purchasing the book, but being able to really get outreach out there so others can, experience the great messages, and also just, really see what your writing is all about.
Yeah, thank you. Also, I should also mention that if you want to follow me on social media, my handle basically across the board is Lizzy Tacular. That's just LIZZY TACULAR. So you can follow me on Instagram, TikTok, Twitter. I am most active on Instagram though.
Got it. Well, thanks for letting us know that. We'll be sure to put the link to your handles as well in the video for folks, pending your permission, of course. And we'll also, put a link for sure to the book itself on Amazon, so folks can be able to, easily access and purchase the book in whatever way they choose to, and or support it, as you mentioned, in, with leaving reviews, and, however other way they can support it if they can't monetarily, because not everybody obviously has the same means as others.
Yeah, and also one other thing that's so important to all books is libraries. So another thing you could do to support the book if you wanted to is to request that your local library buys a copy, because then people who wouldn't have access to it because they can't pay for it will be able to get it for free.
Love that. Thank you so much for reminding me of that, because yes, libraries are a critical aspect of the community that I think sometimes get overlooked nowadays, with
Yeah.
everything going on with the computer age, and phones and social media. But like, your basic library though really interconnects a lot of the lesser privileged folks with more privileged folks, and sort of provides that bridge in terms of having resources for everybody. So definitely, huge proponent of that. With that, we're gonna conclude this episode. Thank you again, Lizzy, for joining us. Really appreciate your time, and your flexibility, and your just in general really enthusiastic, positive attitude. See everybody. Bye. Oh,
Bye.
hold up, Lizzy. Let me put you on for a second. Hey, there you go. Lizzy says bye as well. Take care.
Bye.